Hello and welcome to Thales College's first faculty roundtable. My name is Josh Herring. I'm a professor of classical education and humanities here at Thales College. I'm accompanied here by three members of our faculty. We've got Dr. Peter Forrest, who is our provost and dean of humanities, Professor Mike Romero, who's our business professor and resident expert in all things Austrian economics, and then Professor Jon Rennie, who is a business professor and the most practically inclined of our panel today. He is a CEO of AccuGrid, and he'll bring some great business insights. We hope that these faculty roundtables are a benefit. Occasionally, we like to get together and discuss some contemporary issues. In all of our classes, we are trying to bring students to consider both the theory of the liberal arts while grounded in the practical needs of living today. And today, we're going to be looking really at the question of artificial intelligence and education. How do we respond to the rapid changes of AI? What do we do? We all face this as a very practical question in our courses, and it's one that we started talking about together about 4 months ago. And since that first conversation, about 1,000 different variations of artificial intelligence have arisen. So today, we're going to talk about it and see what conclusions we can come to. Guys, welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you.
Good to be here. All right, well, let's get into it. So, thoughts on artificial intelligence and education. What do we do? What do you think? What's going on?
So I guess the first thing that comes to mind is thinking about the availability of a chatbot. Something you can get on your phone, something you can get on a laptop. That seems to pose potential problems in a classroom where maybe using technology has become somewhat of a norm, whether it's taking notes, whether it's being used for in-class activities. And so it seems like there's going to be decisions that faculty, professors, teachers will have to make regarding policies about the use or rules about the use of laptops. Are they allowed? Are they not allowed? What are the implications of that for assignments that you might have, for readings, things like that? That's just at least some initial thoughts that come to mind.
Do you think that we're naive to think that we don't have to put a strict sort of disciplinary structure on it, and we can? I don't mean about necessarily having computers out on your classroom or not. That individual professors can make that choice. But in terms of cheating, do you think that we're naive if we think an honor code is going to be enough to keep them from cheating?
So I want to jump in on that real quick because on the one hand, I have a lot of respect for schools that do a really strong honor code and that go sort of the higher road of trying to build that as a value in the student culture. I think that depends on having the right students and then continually reinforcing that as a value that we in our school, we behave this way.
Yeah. It helps that it's a small school, too.
Yeah, and certainly that's one thing for us. I'm thinking about with larger schools. I've done a lot of high school visits this week, and in one of those visits, the teacher told me about an interaction she had that I think pushes back to like why there might be stronger structures needed. This was in a 10th grade classroom. Students were taking a test, and the teacher caught one student with a phone. Confiscated the phone. Well, told the student, all right, you didn't get far enough in here. I'm not going to give you a 0. Finish the test. Well, she turned back 10 minutes later and noticed the student had there was an extra phone up this student's sleeve. Wow. The student was packing 2 phones and literally cradling the phone to check using ChatGPT to come up with answers on the test. So I do think it's a question, it's something that students are actively going for. So I think it's a very high barrier to say, is culture alone enough to say why we shouldn't use this?
I think the reality too, I think I was reading online that the usage of AI dropped significantly in the month of June when students went on summer break. So it's definitely being used in education. So that's the reality we face today. I think people are looking for shortcuts. Students are looking for shortcuts. And so they may be tempted to go there to find answers and so quickly get something to be able to answer a question on a test or something, some sort of research. They may be tempted. It's there, it's present, and clearly it's being used in education. So I think the fact that we I think we should understand that even if we have a great honor code, there's likely going to be some temptation to use that for, ease of use, if you will, or trying to get time management, right? Where a student may be overwhelmed, they've got to get assignment done quickly, they're just tempted, they go there, they grab something real quick, and they move on. So.
And I'm worried about, in some ways the phone is a funny story, like packing 2 phones, but that could have been the case before AI, just using the internet, right? In some cases, that's the least scary thing, because you can probably catch students like cheating on a phone during a test. You can probably take steps fairly easily to ensure that they're not literally looking at their phone while they're in your class taking a test. I'm much more concerned about sort of writing assignments.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you possibly, particularly because the point that you're making, John, that they can sort of rationalize and justify it to themselves. They don't maybe have the AI do the entire paper, but just the first draft, right? And then I'll work on it after that. That kind of thing, that slippery slope. And that's where it feels like our honor code isn't going to be enough, and my speeches at the beginning of the term aren't going to be enough. We're going to have to put some more practical restrictions in place, which I haven't at least done in my classes yet. But
I added a section to my syllabus, just that all I could think of to put in writing is that if I can catch you using AI in any part of the process, I literally list out from ideation to organization to resources and research, much less drafting, like any of those stages. I'm taking our existing cheating policy and plagiarism policies and saying that's a 0 for that assignment. But it depends on me catching it, and I'm not confident I can catch it anymore.
It's interesting, because I think one of the things you'd like to be able to sense is every student has their own way of writing, right? And so you're trying to sense, is this the genuine student's voice, right, or is this an AI voice? And you would think that you could, if you're with a student long enough, that you can understand the way they write, right, and their tendencies. But what's concerning is that likely you, as AI gets more sophisticated and you can customize AI to write in your style, it's likely that students can even customize that, and so you may not be able to sense it just by a human interaction with reading through a document, trying to sense the student's voice.
I want to go back to an implication of something you said a minute ago, Peter, about the comparison to prior technology, or the sense of is this really unique? Is this just the newest thing that before we've had plagiarism in papers, we've had the last 10 years, 15, 20 years, I've seen a massive increase in technology in the classroom. The whole ed tech movement in K-12 was huge. One-to-one iPads, the college classroom was taken over by laptops and so on. Is AI actually something different, or is this simply another tool? Is it actually unique, I guess is what I'm really asking.
I was actually along the lines of that. I was thinking about that. The way that I am trying to make sense of it is sort of like Google, some sort of search engine combined with a word generator. And a word generator that's been trained on a bunch of data that, so the chatbot recognizes patterns in the data, and then when it gets fed a prompt, the output that the chatbot feeds back to you is based on patterns in the data. So it's a probability or a statistical model based on things that are out there that it's been trained on, and it also has the ability to access the internet, like Google. So if you search into Google, you're going to get fed a bunch of links, and I guess there's a certain way in which those are prioritized based on Google's, I think it's called the SEO system, something like that.
Search engine optimization.
Yeah, and so there's something like that going on with Google. It seems different. It seems similar with ChatGPT because it's accessing articles, it's accessing websites. But then the new component, I think, is the word generator, where it's generating new text based on some sort of pattern. And then the question that I've been trying to grapple with is, well, what is the means of prioritizing certain patterns of output over others? And it seems as though this thing called prompt engineering, where the person inputting the prompts can tailor the prompt in such a way to get more and more detailed responses depending on the field or the area they're interested in. And so it's necessarily going to be biased, but it seems like in the most general sense, it's almost like the average status quo cliche output, but then it can be tailored into being biased in particular directions based on the human inputter. That's at least what I've been able to kind of make sense of, but curious what others think.
Yeah, so I think 10 years ago, you could cheat on the tests with the phone up your sleeve. I mean, to keep it really simple, right? Right. But I faced people who were plagiarizing on my final papers, but usually, and I probably didn't always catch them, but it was fairly straightforward that they were having to lift passages from something that was on the internet and just sort of cutting and pasting it. And so it was much easier to catch. I think there's not been anything like, we can talk about like the long-term implications sort of philosophically of this technology, but just in terms of like the education game, I think it's like going from, I don't have my drug metaphors, but it's going from like a gateway drug to like heroin or something. It's much more powerful in that respect.
Right, and to Mike's point, what's interesting is, so in the past, so you had the internet, right? And so you would go to source documents, right, articles and things like that, and that's where those facts would lie. And so if you were doing research, you might grab a fact here, grab a fact there, and then you would summarize it yourself, where what AI is doing, it's grabbing those facts and summarizing it itself. And to your point, what's the decision criteria for summarizing and what gets priority is, and so the opinion, if you will, of the chatbot, you don't know how they drew that conclusion as to what they held in higher esteem than others. Whereas a personal, if you're doing the research yourself, you might say, well, I trust this source more than I trust these other sources. So now you're getting some sort of a summary document, new text that didn't exist before, right? That is summarizing data that you don't know how the priority of that data was sorted out. So you get some sort of new text that you don't know what the thinking behind it, the prompts, as you were mentioning. Yeah.
And in terms of why this is sort of more existential, I think, for education, in some sense, you were always doing the tasks. In the past, the technology was doing the same tasks as, say, what going to the library and getting a book was. It was just making it much more convenient because it was now on your laptop and you could search faster. But you were still basically doing the same thing. You were taking text from someplace else and doing the research and then summarizing it yourself. But if the summarizing task is now like the cognitive task that is like literally what we're testing the students on is now being done not by them, that's a whole different
It is. That's my point. That's the thing that's a little disturbing about it, is because the thinking is being done now by the machine, which has never been done before.
And I do wonder. I wonder too. We're worried about it, but in a sense, it also causes these deeper kind of questions about the whole, how education should be done, because we're kind of assuming here that we should be having a kind of extreme, strict policy, like you were suggesting, Josh, that like none of this is okay in the classroom. But someone might come back and say, well, guys, this is like the way that they're going to be in the workforce is they're going to be using this all the time. So why shouldn't they be able to use it in your classrooms? Like the new students should be learning how to like incorporate this into how they are thinking and working.
That gets to another ongoing conversation. I feel like we're always talking about this around here, like the relationship between education and future work. In this case, I think we're looking at, there is something that can happen in education that cannot happen in the workplace. And perhaps the rise of AI will further clarify the distinctions of what belongs in which sphere. But there's something about education that involves learning and contemplating and wrestling with ideas that are going to produce the kind of person who will be very effective in the workplace. But as far as I know, I don't know of any normal business company that pays people to sit around and read Dante. That doesn't happen. But the student who has read Dante and contemplated Dante is better able to poetically imagine and describe solutions to problems in ways that lots of other people can comprehend, because they've gone through that sort of formation. And so I think it's that sort of thing. I think my response is to look at that and say, well, there's a sharp divide between what should we be doing in terms of education, because education is ultimately about formation, versus what am I going to do in the workplace? And that's a different thing.
Well, I am on your side, but I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a second.
You realize you always play devil's advocate this way, which makes it hard for me to believe you're truly on my side.
Let's see how the other two weigh in then. So just to play devil, so I agree with you that we're the greenhouse, and the rules should be different within the greenhouse because it's about formation, so that you force students to work without AI and technology to form their minds such that afterwards, even though they can use the AI in the workplace, they're going to be sharper thinkers and finding solutions and so on. But what happens when we don't need sharper human thinkers, because the AI is going to be doing so much in the workplace that maybe for our self-esteem we want to develop ourselves cognitively, but at least the pressure is not coming from the job market to say, like, you need to be a sharp thinker because the AI is going to be doing the thinking. Right?
So I guess that's where I'm not willing to actually outsource human thinking to the machine. That's part of my antipathy to AI. That's why I think it has. That's why I think at least my proposed final question, I think it has no place in education, because I cannot think of any part of true education that is not actually about forming the student into a certain kind of being. And if it's all about formation, then all of the parts of the educational process are necessary because they're all relevant to forming the student. So outsourcing that, I think, is really just, that's a non-starter. And I would say ultimately, I personally have no interest in working in a company that says I am irrelevant as the human being. Sure. I also think that's going to bring in a lot of other theological propositions about whether it's actually possible and a little bit of philosophical speculation on, is the AI actually thinking?
Well,
It runs us ahead. Runs us aground.
I think the one thing that you guys are touching on is what are the future jobs going to look like? What are we training students to do in the future, right? And so Drucker talked about knowledge workers. And so the big change from the Industrial Revolution is the generation of knowledge workers. And so most of students go to college, they come back, they go into the workforce as a knowledge worker. Well, now many of those knowledge tasks or jobs that they would be being trained up to do now are going to be done by AI for a lot of companies, because they're always looking for trying to be most efficient with the resources, right? To try to get as much done, for as cheap as possible, right? To maximize profit, which is the objective of a business, right? So the question is, what are we training up the students to do? If there's not these knowledge worker jobs, right, in the future, so what are the jobs that students are going to be training up to do in the future? So, and I think it's going to be those that are going to be, it's similar to the days of the robots, right? When robots came on and said, there's going to be no more production workers, right? The robots are going to take all the jobs. Well, it's not true. There was new jobs. And those jobs were working on how to maintain, best utilize robots in the manufacturing process. I think it's going to be the same thing. It says, how do we best use these tools to maximize the performance of a business? So it's the knowledge. I think it's going to be a partnership, similar to the way the internet is today. It's a human plus the machine is going to be giving your best output, is what I'm thinking.
I agree, and I like your answer. I mean, I'm sure there's more, that's not a complete answer. I'm sure there's more maybe that could be said on the question of what the future of education should be. But I like your answer better than some of the articles that we've been reading in preparation for this conversation and some of the other things that I've seen on the internet. There's a form of argument in response to this question, which is kind of a bad news, good news response, right? Bad news, humans improving their cognitive capabilities to the maximum amount is now going to be obsolete. Like, there's just no point to do that because AI is going to be able to do it all better, right? Good news, you can still be useful by using sort of your soft skills. Right, so humans are going to be the coaches and the mentors, and we're still going to need, we're still going to crave that human interaction, even though all the thinking, as it were, is going to be being done by the robot, right? So this is my theological conviction come in. I absolutely want to push hard against that for a number of reasons, and we could talk about it. But even if, and I think it's a big if, but even if a lot of the cognitive tasks that knowledge workers now do are going to be done more cheaply, more efficiently by AI, I would be deeply disturbed if we sort of made human education about only sort of soft skills, as it were, and sort of gave up on pushing our minds to their greatest capacities. I think there's something deeply misguided about that. And that's what I'm seeing people, like the conversation being.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, building off of those 2 points, this idea of new tools have come around. Over the past 200 years, we've had new technology, new tools. We've had new types of jobs that 100 years ago, your ancestors couldn't even fathom, based on computer technology, based on phones, air travel, things like that.
Who could have imagined a social media manager as a job, a well-paying, highly skilled job?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. And I think the tendency I've seen, like just kind of thinking about it over the years, is that these new tools emerge as complements to the human actor, complements to the human judgment and the input that the human person is providing. And I think it's easier to recognize that when we think about like automation on an assembly line, because clearly there's still going to be a human person repairing. And even with the advent of computers, there's a computer engineer, someone needs to type in the code. I think the different thing with AI is that there's the opportunity to cognitively like offload certain things, but just because you can doesn't mean you should have it do everything, maybe, even though it could maybe do like a mediocre job of certain tasks. Maybe it means that we need to recognize, like you were saying earlier, like the importance of having a space where you can cultivate your own mind, your own judgment, and that there's a value in that. And that maybe later on, which I think, Peter, you were saying, like after they graduate, they go on and they have the opportunity to use any chatbot or whatever might be around in the years to come. But at least they're going to have that they're not going to be a victim to whatever the machine is telling them. They're not going to assign it all of the tasks. They're going to be an autonomous, responsible person that realizes why their own judgment matters. And I think that's something maybe that you can get by responsible AI tool use.
So I want to tag in 3 thoughts, and then we'll go to Peter, and we'll probably go to a new question here in a moment. Sure. But because we've been on this one for a little bit, I think part of this, to maybe try and tie some of this together, I think it's really crucial to keep in mind that if what we're doing is related to what we're doing, particularly in the college space, if what we're doing there is related to future job placement, it sounds like we're all pretty much in agreement that we are preparing students for jobs that don't exist yet. And that, so there is no one-to-one correspondence between, well, I got a degree in X, therefore I will have X job. Yeah. We're looking at a status quo where the entry-level jobs across a variety of fields are vanishing by the day. I had a conversation a couple weeks ago with a friend of mine who's he's a software engineer for a Raleigh company, and he was telling me about how recently they've offloaded several of their entry-level software engineers because now you can have non-specialists who are good at vibe coding do the same job. And so they don't, and he's saying...
I don't even know what vibe coding is.
So hypothetically, Peter, if you can just come up with the right prompts, you don't need to know any computer science or any coding. Yeah, right. You can just get the AI to do the coding, which this caused this was 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Free Press ran an article about a whole bunch of now computer science grads who are on the market and they can't get jobs. They did a computer science degree on the premise that they would be making a 6-figure salary upon graduation, and no one's hiring them anymore because now you can get John Smith who can vibe code for $60,000 or whatever. So there's that part of it. I think if we are thinking about jobs, we've got to be thinking about forming people for jobs of the future. The other thing that came to mind, I think, Mike, as you were talking, I was thinking about the Industrial Revolution, and the thought was that the tools of the Industrial Revolution and the appliances that were produced were going to somehow produce more leisure. I don't think that's actually happened. I think we as a culture, we have more tools and helps to make our lives easier that somehow actually mean we're supposed to do far more than anyone else has ever done at any point in human history. So I'm very skeptical of the claims that AI is going to somehow produce all this greater efficiency that somehow leads to easier life. I'm a little afraid that what it's actually going to do is to be like, oh, well, you can do your job plus monitor 6 AI programs, and now what used to be 1 full-time job is now 1.75 full-time jobs. Yeah. And that's what it takes to get by. Last thing is that I do want to just at least posit that we don't have any obligation in an education space to think we have to teach students to use mainstream technology. Whatever policies we have in place, our students are going to be ace AI users. Like, they just are. They probably are already far better than the 4 of us are at using AI to get what they want done. So I don't think that at all, the fact that we might say in this class we're not using artificial intelligence does not prevent them from also loading Claude as soon as they're outside of class and making a funny meme using Claude.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I there might be value in schools and colleges figuring out how to teach their students to use this technology beyond what the student can just figure out on their own. Hopefully there are people who are thinking deeply about how to educate the next generation in using this technology well. And I think it goes to some of the things Mike was saying about how to use a technology in a way that still, involves you being an autonomous individual who's thinking for him or herself. But I agree with you that I don't think we need to do that. I think, given the choice between teaching the students sort of, in the classical sense, critical thinking and prudence, or teaching them how to be really adept at the AI, I'd go with the first thing every time. And for us right now, it doesn't feel, if we could do both, great, right? But I think for us, the only way that we're going to do the first thing is if we cordon off a kind of, I hate to use the term, but safe space, as it were, right? No.
I can't even. I'm just kidding.
If we sort of have a technology-free zone here at the college, more than I think we've given thought to up to this point. So I'm in agreement with you on that one. Just real quick on the leisure point, I actually, while you're probably right, and maybe that's a dystopian nightmare scenario where everyone's doing 1.75 jobs. I think the more dystopian, more nightmare scenario is that there really isn't any work for people to do, and they get a check from the government or whatever. And I actually think people are designed to work and to work really hard, and that's part of what makes our lives meaningful. And I am genuinely more concerned that people are going to be sitting around with nothing to do as well. Both are kind of nightmare scenarios, maybe, but.
Well, let's go to a different question. I did want to hear, we've been specifically thinking about AI in education. I'm curious, I've seen several of these, but I'm curious what y'all have seen. Has anybody seen any truly egregious usages of AI or any really amazing, impressive usages of AI? What are people actually doing with this new technological capability?
Well, I think it's really powerful in a lot of cases. So, like for example, we were looking at curriculum, going forward, and I basically had AI compare different educational programs from different universities and come up with the common themes amongst all of them and what's unique about different ones. So, to be able to take a massive amount of data and just sort of summarize it in a way that it would take you a long time to be able to do that yourself. There's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of power in sort of doing things that would be difficult to do on your own, right? Is to take this data set, give me a comparison, or summarize this document, type of thing. Where it's somewhat time consuming to do as a human, I think those are sort of what I've seen as a way to augment your work. Like I'm trying to do more, right? And so to be able to compare this data set, what do you find? Summarize this document to be able to help you. But I think drawing the line of saying the decision's mine, like I'm going to make the decision, the human decision is going to be here, but I want you to help me with summarizing or assembling the data or the information. Yeah. I think that's where I've seen it to be very powerful. And I think the other side of it is video and photos. The amount of AI influence in that is it's remarkable. It's getting better and better almost by the week, to the point where I think we're going to start doubting what we see with our own eyes here soon. And so truth is going to get a little bit gray. And that's the area that's kind of a little scary. When you're talking about an egregious use of AI, I worry that we're going to be skeptical of anything that we see. Like that's probably AI. We're gonna doubt everything, and so we'll become skeptical about everything, and the truth will be always fuzzy, and no one will believe anything anymore. So that's a little bit scary from my side. So
one thing I've been thinking about is not really something I've witnessed, but maybe a potential for using chatbots responsibly in a way that actually gets at truth. Could be something along the lines of Hans Georg Gadamer, philosopher who Josh and I have been talking about recently, but a lot of people in, I think, phenomenology or these hermeneutic scholars will talk about understanding as being based in some questions that you're bringing to the table. Whether it's a conversation and you're bringing questions to your conversation partner, or it's a text that you're engaging with, you're coming with questions, and there's somewhat of a fusion of horizons between people at the table or between you and this text that you're kind of interacting with, where new knowledge, new ideas, novel insights can be generated that weren't there before. And so there's this play of question and answer. And it seems like with large language models, they are well suited for that play of question and answer, where you as an individual can be putting in prompts, you get some feedback, you're putting in other questions, you get questions, you're putting in there's some sort of ongoing, like, emergent process where you are engaging with some sense of this kind of social stock of knowledge that's out there, because the data is all based on things that have already been imagined before. So you're kind of, maybe it provides opportunities for you as the person engaging with it to come up with new insights that you might not have otherwise thought of. And I guess, so there's that play of question and answer. And there's something else I was going to mention to that, but I'll stop there. I can't remember it.
I want to know what Josh's egregious sort of. Right. I mean, I feel like we're being fairly optimistic here.
Yeah, I'll be the negative one. That's fine. So I'm just going to run through a list. A few weeks ago, Dave Rubin did a podcast show where he used AI to generate the appearance of a young man who was shot in the Parkland school shooting some years ago, and it was all with his parents' permission. They were fine with it. That strikes me as just absolutely horrific, to literally conjure up the ghost of the dead and then host a conversation as if you could actually talk to this kid.
Can I play a devil's advocate there?
But maybe.
And I'm not saying that character is the right character, but imagine creating an avatar of a character from the past and having a discussion with a dialogue with someone from the past that's based on a large language model. So I think I don't like that particular use of it, but I see that as kind of an interesting. What if you have a conversation with somebody from the past and it's based on everything they've ever written, and then you can actually have a dialogue. You can have a virtual podcast guest, if you will, with someone from the past. Is very interesting. So
I'll just notice that, like, what all of these things are doing, every usage that you guys just mentioned is replacing some actual human interaction with the appearance of a human interaction. I'm interacting with a human being. So I would much rather, I think I use podcasting primarily as a way to connect with other people. Yeah. And so, like, being able to conjure up Aristotle is not actually discussing with Aristotle. And in fact, I've now traded my understanding of Aristotle through wrestling with the text for really wrestling with a simulacrum of Aristotle that some computer program has generated. Sure. You're about to tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, but think about what Mike was saying about the play and the back and forth.
Well, so let me keep going with my negative list before y'all tell me why we need to be.
Sure.
Because I'll just point out, everyone who uses AI becomes an evangelist for AI.
Well, I don't use it.
Okay.
I'm just playing devil's advocate. Go ahead.
So you've also got the now existent examples of ghost-written books on Amazon that are completely written by AI, not actual books. The top song on Spotify for about a week was AI generated that caused a bunch of lawsuits where bands that should have been in those top spots said, Spotify, you owe us money. Ted Goya wrote a really interesting post last week that was kind of getting into your dystopia a bit. And I think the Parkland shooter AI ghost, I think, speaks to this. They're like, what actually happens to our civilization when we already are in a pretty low trust moment as a country? What happens when we actually no longer trust photos, videos, audio, any kind of digital information? There have now been multiple cases of something that's still, the diagnosis is still being worked out, but AI psychosis. You've got Elon Musk using AI to generate softcore porn all over the internet, all over Twitter. That's its own problem, which of course is what all technology is used for in its first iteration. You've got the problem of AI hallucinations that is paired with the presumption that I think more and more teenagers are skeptical of this presumption. But there's this presumption that if I use AI like a search engine, what it returns to me is correct. I've watched both of my parents do this. And maybe that's just an age thing where they will just ask chat a question. And whatever chat tells them back, they think is correct. Yeah. I'm like, that has nothing to do with ChatGPT itself. It has everything to do with what people believe it to be. They assume that it is an authoritative source of information.
Yeah. Do you think that that's different than what those people would have done with Google search engine? Is it just a slightly more power? Is it just a more intense version of it?
I think it's further down that road. I wouldn't say it's that different, but I think it's more intense than it used to be.
Sure, yeah.
The last one I will just bring up is our pre-show conversation about sermon AI.
Yeah.
I think now this is also not a truly new problem. There have been sermon research companies that will do the work of prepping a sermon for a pastor for money. But this is now, once again, kind of outsourcing a very human work. And this all strikes me as a case of our state's motto, esse quam videre, to be rather than to seem. And I maintain it is still better to be something than to seem something. So those are some of the egregious cases I see. I think this is a technology that is shaped for abuse. I don't think it's shaped for proper use.
So you don't think, just to take the example of the bringing dead people back, as it were, right?
The Witch of Endor.
So you don't think that there's a kind of redeemed or positive version of that John was sort of outlining? No, to me, it seems like it's obviously a positive, provided that the person using it is clear that it's not really Aristotle. I mean, of course they know Aristotle's still dead, but that this isn't the sole, this isn't the final answer of what Aristotle would have said on X, right? So if we bring back Abraham Lincoln or whatever, we have to realize, of course, that what we're bringing back is some kind of summary of all the things that they've written and the speeches they've made or whatever. But that summary is still a powerful thing, a way for us to learn about that person and their thought that we didn't have access to before.
Is it? I mean, it doesn't. You don't really learn about Abraham Lincoln's thought by reading a summary of Abraham Lincoln's thought. To really learn
Abraham
his
Lincoln
thought, you need to read everything the man wrote. You need to study him. You need to do that work. What this lets you do is have a shortcut that lets you appear to have studied.
No, it lets you have a conversation with, a summary of their thinking, and you're interacting with it. If you don't take it as this is what this person would have said on X, but it's the beginning of sort of prompting you to think about their views on X. It seems like that's pretty exciting.
But can you gain new insights? I think that's kind of interesting. It's like having two AI models debate, two historical figures that would never have met in real life and have a discussion. And then what comes out of that is very, there may be insights that come from that you wouldn't have got from studying everything they've ever written.
But Josh, is your suggestion that that couldn't really be new knowledge because you don't know if the way that the AI has summarized their thinking really would encapsulate what that person would have thought?
There's no way to know that. What's also in the mix here, like C.S. Lewis talks about in The Abolition of Man, the danger of any kind of technology is the appearance of freedom, but the reality of control. that you appear. He uses the example of the airplane as the easiest example. Like the airplane gives the illusion of the power of flight. But no man truly has the power of flight. What he has instead is the ability to purchase the power of flight from a company that is selling that. But that company has control over anybody that's inside that airplane. They can remove that power. So what happens? So let's take that example. Let's say we can recreate the Lincoln Douglas debates. We can drop everything Stephen Douglas said into ChatGPT and everything Lincoln ever said into Grok and say, what if these two men were both alive in 1870? How would they respond to Reconstruction? A total hypothetical scenario.
Right.
And, well, in which case, what we're really getting is Grok's summary versus ChatGPT's summary, both of which are influenced by their coders, both have proven bias in different ways. So you further got to compensate for that. But again, I don't think most people who are using this are not looking at this to think, oh, I want to create this so that I can then go weigh and evaluate the way they're doing it. They're doing it because it's quick and it's easy.
Yeah.
And then it lets them say, oh, here's what Lincoln would have thought about Reconstruction. Done. Mm. And so maybe if we posit perfect people in a perfect world, I'm like, sure, of course we could use this. I want to posit sinful people in a sinful world and consider what is happening with this technology and what's the cost of this technology. Because it's one thing if we're talking about, again, mature adults who are like, yeah, I want to set up instead of my normal role-playing game monthly night, we're going to set up dueling AI bots and we're all going to like see how they do against each other and we're going to make like a mini debate club. That's one thing. I'm far more worried about children growing up in an era where like the first impulse of everyone is run it through AI.
Let me give you an example. When computers, I'm the oldest one in the room, I think, right? So when computers came out, to use them, I had to program it. And so I needed to know how to program if I wanted to use a computer. So I learned programming. And so once computers got to the point where you didn't need to know how to program them to use them, I thought to myself, well, the people using computers aren't going to actually know how they work, right? They're not going to understand the DNA behind a computer, right? And so I thought, well, they're not going to. So it's similar to your point about, like, if you haven't read all the works of Lincoln, then you're not really qualified to talk about Lincoln, right? Until you've done the work. So, but yet I found now that a lot of people don't know how to program, but can use computers to really augment things, to really improve what they can do in terms of their impact to society. So I think similarly, I think AI can be a tool if used properly, right, to help humans do more things and to better society. So I think it can be a tool, and we don't necessarily have to know how to program to use that tool, I guess is what I'm probably arguing a bit.
And as I think about this, and I'm thinking about this in real time, but just still wanting to, just as one sort of potential counterexample to your doom and gloom, just fixating on this idea of bringing back historical figures or summarizing, not really bringing them back, summarizing their written word.
I didn't know we were going to talk about necromancy so much in a discussion on AI, but apparently it's all about necromancy.
So again, it's really important that whoever's using it realizes the limitations of what they're actually doing, but there's limitations in two ways, right? One is that all of the works, I mean, Lincoln, for instance, he didn't write that much, right? I mean, all the works of Lincoln are going to wildly leave out much of the man, right? And even some, Aristotle wrote a lot, but clearly the works of Aristotle are going to leave out some of what Aristotle would have thought about things and his opinions and so on. So that's the first danger, but that feels like a fairly easy one to sort of address, that relatively mature people should be able to make a distinction between I'm engaging with a sophisticated summary of this person's written thought versus I'm engaging with the person themselves, right? And provided that you make that distinction, it seems like that second thing is a really rich possibility that you could do that. But I think you're pointing to a second limitation, which is that how do we know that inevitably there's going to be some inaccuracy or imperfection in whether it's a human being or whether it's an AI in what they're summarizing. And so if you haven't done the work of the summarizing, but you're just learning from it, that's going to be imperfect or or inadequate in some way. But it feels like, again, if you recognize the limitations in the same way that when you're searching for Google, you don't think that Google's answer is kind of being, dropping down from Mount Sinai as God's honest truth, that it could still be useful to say, this may not be perfect, but this is a pretty good summary of this person's total thought that I couldn't otherwise have gotten. And so I'm learning things about it while being skeptical that it's the God's honest truth.
So if I can add an example,
Sure.
I think fits what you were describing. This is going back a few years now, but I remember I was talking to one student who this is back when Hamilton, the musical, had just come out. I was talking with this student, her name was Grace, and she loved Hamilton. And I enjoyed Hamilton because I thought, oh, this is great. This is sort of an epic poem version of like the American colonial experience, the Revolutionary War. This is great. But I looked at that as somebody who did a history major and has looked at the American Revolutionary history and thought, oh, what a cool adaptation. You see, this student hadn't done that. She had just seen Hamilton. And I was drawing a whole bunch of connections of things that I thought that play was speaking to.
Right.
She couldn't see any of those. And that, I think, fits what you're describing. Like, I think the person who goes to ChatGPT after having like, man, I've spent 6 months reading Lincoln's speeches and immersing myself in Team of Rivals and looking at all the players during the Revolution or during the Civil War, and like, I feel like I really know Lincoln. That person's going to pull up this like ChatGPT version of Lincoln, is going to see a lot of things more, versus the one who's like, let me just start there. So maybe it's a question of like using, where do you use it then?
I think, coming with that background understanding, that background knowledge, those skills, already having the sort of the prerequisites and then using it as a tool, I think is helpful. Also thinking about, I think a theme that came up is understanding what exactly AI is doing or what large language models are doing. I think that could be beneficial, because then you can realize that, hey, this is actually distinct from what I'm doing, from what we're doing as humans. It's not the same thing. And I think if you don't have even just like a basic understanding of what it's doing in terms of it being this sort of predictive statistical model, I think it can lead to some problems. And so one thing I have seen is this idea of techno-socialism, which is a term in recent years. There's a really good paper by Rosalino Candela and Pete Boettke on this, and also a recent Wall Street Journal article that Marian Tupy and Pete Boettke wrote on a similar theme. Just basically in those pieces, they're arguing that just because we now have this large statistical modeling tool, unlike what we've had in the past, does not therefore mean that socialism is now possible. We still have to rely upon, the future is uncertain. Consumer tastes are uncertain. The ultimate resource is the human being. What the model might predict we might want, or how we might want to allocate our resources, if it's centralized, it's going to be according to the plans of whoever is running that model. And so it's necessarily going to limit our standards of living and human well-being. But even if it's not, and it's still based on some model, it's based on trends that have been extrapolated from the past. It's a matter of the past. It's not based on this forward-looking, imagined future that human beings are uniquely capable of imagining. And so I think that if we recognize the limits of large language models, and then we also understand, and maybe this is where economics comes in, like the value of experimentation in the face of uncertainty, entrepreneurship, trying out new ideas, learning, and not being tied and beholden to this model that's always necessarily going to be somewhat like churning the wheels, or we think that we can just have socialism and offload our allocation of resources to this model, but there's going to be dramatic consequences, arguably, in terms of our innovation, standards of living, things like that.
Something we haven't talked about at all that seems relevant to what you just brought up, Mike, I think is the cost of AI in terms of energy and resources. I mean, certainly this is already putting an enormous strain on our electrical grid. There are new data centers going in all over the place. I found out a friend of mine works for the Department of Transportation, and he was telling me that apparently the town of Cary the government of Cary is very excited about a new data center coming in. The people who live in the town of Cary are very angry about this new data center coming in. And I haven't read much about this, but there's something about like the water usage that has increased to cool servers. So like this is not there's a lot of questions that still need to be raised about how quickly. This is my turn to have a thought that's forming on the fly. Like I want there to be some sort of period of time to actually ask the question of, first off, how should AI be used? Secondly, how ought we develop that, counting the cost of AI? But that's not the direction that technology develops. Like technology seems to me to develop very, very quickly, always with an eye towards, if we don't do as much of this as quickly as possible, China will win. Yeah. And that's I don't mean to discount that as a possibility. Yesterday, there apparently were AI-driven drones used in the Ukraine-Russian war. So like the military applications are already starting to roll in and be in effect. So there is a national defense angle on this that we've not touched on at all. But I think there's something about, I want there to be some period of reflection and contemplation rather than just we will develop this in as infinite directions as possible, as quickly as possible, with the hope that it solves every human problem.
Well, so, I mean, one question is, do you think that's remotely possible? But okay, so then the next question is, if it's not realistic, and obviously none of us are in any kind of powerful position that could even think to
You're the provost. You have carte blanche.
I'm thinking about, say, in the U.S. government to sort of shape policy. How can we carve out a space, right? So if globally or nationally, there's not going to be a pause where we all think deeply about the implications of this technology. Nevertheless, can we carve out, a place here where we're doing that at the small scale with a small number of people? The article by Ted Gioia that you mentioned, he was worried in particular about the implications of knowledge and truth of all this stuff. What you were bringing up before, Jon, right? I mean, given how good AI can be to fake video and audio and pictures and so on, what's going to be real anymore, et cetera. And he listed the predictions as the people's reactions, that they were going to be skepticism, aloofness, silence, indifference, distrust. And once you have all of that, that is people that are basically no one's trusting anyone. So sort of the social interactions that kind of are the foundation of a healthy society. Once those things are breaking down, then hostility is the last thing. That it'd be very easy for there to be violence and hostility when people aren't trusting each other. We've already seen that in the last couple of years in our society. One question I have is, how can we as a college be a place where we're pushing against those 6 things, right? At least in a very small scale, like where we're pushing against skepticism, we're pushing against silence, indifference, and so on. I was curious if you guys had any thoughts about that.
I will answer very briefly since I had a long monologue, even after I suggested we all try to avoid monologuing at the beginning. I think this is where the liberal arts really do play a key role and have got to be defended and have got to be significant in our college, because those are when we both model and invite students to look at tried and true, timeless sources of wisdom. It pushes against the presentism and the sense of whatever is currently happening is most important. So I think being actually rooted in the liberal arts tradition inherently does what you're describing. I think it's maybe back to your original question about is an honor code sufficient? It's far more, I think in the long run, it's far more effective to have a culture that asks the right questions and encourages reflection and contemplation on a personal level than to have some top-down policy that says, therefore we reject it all because it's terrible. No, we need our students to weigh and consider these questions carefully without us as professors hammering the truth that we think is true, whether we do or not, on them. We need to invite them to that discussion.
Yeah, I think more than ever, character matters, integrity matters. virtue matters. So these things are like, if we're talking about future jobs, the human side of it is going to be critical. So leadership, for example, is always going to be about dealing with other humans. How are you going to deal with other people? And how are you going to treat other people? And so I think character more than anything is going to matter probably more than in the past. So I think because we're social creatures, right? So humans are social creatures. So we're going to want to gravitate towards people that we can trust, right? And so the people that will be sort of successful, if you will, in the future are the ones that people are going to trust. And especially when we come with a time where there's a lot of doubt towards everything. We can't trust anything, but I can trust this person because they've always had the right character. So I think character more than anything is going to be very important kind of going forward.
Thinking about character, one thing that I think is important, and it doesn't really directly address the question, but it's kind of related to what Jon was saying, is perhaps the importance of seminar discussions, the importance of case studies, at least in business, and even in economics, where you're looking at cases that illustrate key ideas and themes, and students and yourself, you're situating yourself in the situation of some other actor, and you're thinking through the decisions that were made, the trade-offs that were made. You're getting a sense for risk. And putting your kind of personal responsibility and putting your own thoughts on the line, getting feedback in real time, working to cope with that, because I think that those are things that AI can't do, and are arguably uniquely human things that can't be replicated in a model. And it seems as though, at least in some of the entrepreneurial case studies that we've been reading in some of my courses, that the more skilled actors in the business world or in any area of professional life are not as reflective as beginners. As when you're a beginner to a new field, perhaps you're more reliant on okay, what does the rule say I should do? How do I act in this situation? But then as you get more experience dealing with thousands of situations, you cultivate an intuition where you almost have this unreflective wisdom or judgment. And I think that that's something that maybe could be emphasized in the sense that, sure, there's a lot of knowledge that's out there, but maybe what matters more is how you make use of that knowledge in your own choices and your own actions.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think I completely agree with that answer in terms of cultivating wisdom or prudence, judgment, and that's kind of one of the central goals of our college, right? One of the central aims. I do think with just pure knowledge, though, too, if it's that, we can't check on the internet anymore, or we can't just ask AI because we literally don't know whether the source is accurate or reliable. I mean, that's going to be a huge thing that obviously we can't solve here, but I like the idea of trustworthy people. It does suggest that if we're to be trustworthy people, we've got to read books, we've got to use our memories, we have to have things that are stored up in our minds. Not that we can have the knowledge, all the knowledge that the internet has, but that we would have enough that we can then have wise judgment and judging between what's true and false and so on.
I think that's really right, and it goes to this crisis has been brewing for a long time, but in academia, I'm convinced we are in the early stages of an epistemological change, where the sense has been in wider academia that if it's peer-reviewed, it's trustworthy, and it's reliable. There have now been too many successful hoax papers published in major journals that I don't just trust major journals because they're major journals anymore. And this is at least my solution. I think fits with what y'all been saying. I trust the scholarship of people that I know. Mm-hmm. And so it's a matter of not just, well, is this the highest journal in the field? Or no, it's okay, do I know that person, and do I know that he does good archival research, and so that I've met him and I know his value. I think this also is this is all going to force us to be so much more attentive to what is irreducibly human, and what can we do in the shaping of young minds and fostering curiosity and helping orient people towards the great tradition What do we do in that AI cannot do? There's a lot AI can do, but I still don't think AI can do everything. And there is something about education that is fundamentally human.
Well, I think, to your point, I mean, we don't want a heart surgeon, right, to have cheated all his or her way all through college, right? Or a pilot, all right, or what have you. So part of education is making sure that our students understand the basics, and so I think there's an element of this that, yes, we want them to be people of character, right? But they also have to learn the basics. They have to understand the things that go into, and that's why I think case studies, looking at historical documents, looking at older works to be able to form the ideas. They understand the basics of how this stuff was put together. Because I think at the end of the day, if you're an entrepreneurial, for example, an entrepreneurial business major, they need to understand some basic things about accounting. Right, that is not going to help. AI is not going to help you there. You need to be able to look at a P&L statement, understand what that means to your business. So I think there's skills that students still need to develop, right? Like a pilot, like a surgeon, right? But at the end of the day, I think that I think the idea of character and integrity and being a person of character is the thing that's going to really stand out in the future because of all this doubt that we have on what's true and what's not true.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a great conversation. As we start wrapping up, I just want to close with one last question. Let's just make it let's make it real. After everything we've talked about, do you think AI is a tool that we need to learn how to moderately use, or is this something that we need to just categorically reject?
I think a tool that we learn how to moderately use responsibly.
I agree, but I like the idea that in a school or in a college, you would do all that you sort of is reasonable to keep it out. Not because of a kind of Ludditism that's anti-technology, but rather because we want to be about developing our own cognitive gifts to their highest capacity. And to answer the last question, which I think is relevant, my philosophical answer, because I've been thinking about this, that the thing that AI, even the most sophisticated sort of long-term best AI is not going to be able to have is consciousness. And from consciousness flows moral responsibility, free will, and genuine understanding, genuine rationality. So there's a kind of a simulacrum of reasoning and intelligence that can be very impressive that AI can do, but consciousness, I think, is the key thing. And prudence, which combines rationality, reasoning, with morality. So prudence is kind of practical wisdom about ordering your loves, ordering what's actually valuable in life. AI can tell you if you want a chicken sandwich, here's how to go get it. AI can't tell you what's more valuable, the greasy chicken sandwich and the joy that gives you, or having a thin waistline. Right? That's a value judgment that only conscious beings persons can do. And that's the human element. That's what the liberal arts, that's what entrepreneurial business can foster in our students is to develop prudence.
I would just I think that's a great final line. I would just add that I think Aristotle's really helpful here. This too is something that the question of right action is not just the right action, but it's the right action at the right time, to the right extent, in the right place, by the right person. Developing an ethical decision is really weighing a choice in all of those different domains. And I think that AI is presented as a tool that you could is presented as something simple. And I don't think it's actually simple at all, as hopefully our conversation today has illustrated. This actually is a very complex tool that can do a lot of things. But the question that we have to wrestle with, particularly in teaching, is the cost of using it worth the efficiency gains or the novelty that it brings? And I think that's a question that we can each answer for our own classrooms. And I think I'm with you, Peter, on I don't really see a place for it inside education. I do see a place for it, like a lot of the other technological moves over the last 20 years, can create incredible gains in efficiency that might create a lot more economic gains and hopefully on the profit side of that P&L statement. But that's a later step for our students. So that's where I've ended on this conversation. I think this has been really helpful. I've enjoyed this. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, viewers, for joining us for our very first faculty roundtable here at Thales College. If you want to learn more about what we're doing at Thales College, please check us out at thalescollege.org. That's THALES college.org.